Good morning and welcome to our Cranley community. Today is the 11th of January 2024 and we are here live from Cranley, Abu Dhabi for our second Cranley Community Committee Speaker Series talk, the second one of this year. We've done many of these before, and as I've just been saying, I'm always a little bit nervous when I come on live. So thank you for joining me. I can see people already are on live. And we've got a brilliant speaker today. So I'm really, really excited to welcome him into our call. I'm just going to say a few things first. I know you don't want to hear from me. That's not why you're here. But I did just want to say a couple of things first out there to our whole community. Apologies, first of all, for my rough voice. And if I do get into a coughing fit mid-talk, and just sending lots of love out there to all those other people who've spent the holidays being a little bit poorly. There's a lot of bugs flying around, so do look after yourself and your families, and make sure you're taking care of your health. Bit of news from Cranley Abu Dhabi. We have, since I last came on live in September and spoke to you, we have opened our new pre-prep building, which is hugely exciting. It's been delightful to go up there and to see all of our pre-prep children, the founding members of our new site with their teddies. And I just want to say, again, well done to everyone involved in getting that open and getting that off the ground. It's just such an amazing atmosphere there, and thank you to all of those parents for your patience, for your support in getting that new building up and running as well. Also well done to our safeguarding, pastoral and wellbeing teams. Again, since I last came on, we've actually been reaccredited with excellence in wellbeing and pupil development awards. It's been a huge amount of work, so thank you specifically to Mrs. Dale, to Miss Harper and to Tori, our counsellor, for all of their hard work with that. And again, to our students, to our parents. We had parents in being interviewed by the inspector. Thank you for all of your feedback. And on that, I just wanted to say, well-being is a journey. And we're all in this together. So thank you to our parents. We do have a parent wellbeing committee. We're going to meet again in the next few weeks. If you want to be part of that, my email is there on the screen, so do just drop me an email. We're talking about how we can improve well-being for our children. So we have a range of parents already involved in this, and had some great suggestions. Some of these talks, the content has come from those discussions. Some of the assemblies we're doing in the next few weeks comes out of our discussions with parents about what you need support with for your children. So if you want to be part of that, details will be on the newsletter on Friday, but also just drop me an email as well. And our principal, Mrs. Crowder-Clow, is also running some parent consultation meetings. And if you want to be part of that about school development, please drop her an email. The details, again, will be on the newsletter on Friday. If you're not getting the newsletter and you're a new parent, please do just let me know, and we will make sure that we resolve that. It often goes to junk mail, so please just type in Cranley into your search, and like mine on my Gmail, it all comes up. Last thing I want to do is thank our community committee. So thank you to the CCC for all your hard work so far this year. We've got some exciting events coming up. There is a pre-prep pajama party. There is also our book sale. We have a community iftar coming up as well at the start of Ramadan. So please do check the newsletter for details about all of those events. To our new parents, welcome. For some of you, this will be the first time that you've been online, and thank you for so many of you coming to our coffee morning this week. It was wonderful to meet so many people, to start new friendships, to get support for our parents who are new to Abu Dhabi. We know how daunting it can be starting a new life here. We're here to be your village. We're here to be the support that you need. There are 11 members of the CCC. You can contact them about anything, and they'll be happy to help support you as well. So on to our talk. Now, I have been wanting to speak to the gentleman that we're going to introduce for nearly, well, I think this is the third year that we've tried to do this, because the content of this is fascinating. As a mum of third culture children, third culture kids, as a teacher, I've just been with my year 12 class, because that's what I mainly do is teach. And we were talking about this. What are the benefits and drawbacks of being a child raised outside of your parents' culture, your parents' community? And some of what they had to say is exactly what Chris and I have been talking about. So Chris is here. He is a international speaker. He does this for a living. This is his thing. He is an author. I've been trying to get hold of his book, but unfortunately it isn't working in the region, so I need to try a bit harder. He is a globe trotting adventurer, and that's how he wants to be recognized. And he's here to talk to us today about how we can parent and how we can support our third culture kids. So we need to know what that means. So I'm going to invite him into the call. And I'm going to hand over to him. Hi, Chris.
Hello there. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. It's so lovely to get you in. I know it's online. It would be better in person. It always is. But I know that there are people watching, and I know that there will be hundreds of people who watch this call, sat with a cup of tea in their own time and listen to this, whether they listen when they're going for a walk or however they do it. And, you know, it's great to be able to direct our parents to talks like this that we do. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Why is this your area of interest? How did that happen?
Oh, goodness. Well, I am a third culture kid. And so, you know, there's some vested interest. And I would say there's been phenomenal work done just in the time that I've been speaking about third culture kids. I didn't find out about the term or any of the research or any of the great work that's been done until I was in university. And very genuinely, I sort of thought, oof, I'd have known this earlier. I probably would have saved myself a lot of trouble, to save my family a lot of trouble and misunderstanding. And that was pretty good motivation. I thought, I know. I mean, everyone I grew up with was a third culture kid. So I thought, you know, what can I do to help my people? And now I do. I get to learn from them. There's more research being done all the time as the world changes. Things for TCKs change. So I have the immense privilege of really getting to do a lot of good cross-pollination between all the different schools and organizations, NGOs, and all sorts of things that I get to work with.
Amazing. So we are currently live on YouTube and Facebook. In the background, we have Zaina, who is going to field questions from those, and we're going to ask you at the end. So I'm going to go out of the call now. If anyone does have any questions they want to ask anonymously, my email's there. I'll be checking it. If you don't want your name on it on Facebook, that's fine. We understand. So drop us an email. Let us know you're out there listening as well. And yeah, if you've got any questions for Chris, during the talk, just let us know and we will come back together once we've heard what you've got to say. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go out of the call and I will come back at the end. I'm just going to share your PowerPoint. Is that working for you?
That's perfect.
Perfect. And I'm going to say see you soon. All right. I'm really excited to hear what you've got to say. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so very much. And yeah, thank you so very much for joining me. I genuinely do get very, very excited to get to share about this. And there's so much. We've only got so much time today. So we're in some ways we're going to go over the tips of some icebergs, because there are multiple icebergs, I think, when it comes to third culture kids. And I'm gonna use a fair amount of stories when I talk, because I get to speak with parents, I get to speak with students, I get to speak with teachers and counselors. And the reality is, speaking with students is great because it keeps you on your toes, because students, you got to work to engage them. So dear parents, don't worry, I'm going to put the same level of excitement in that I would to hopefully keep kids' attention as well. So with that, I thought we would start today looking at just what a third culture kid is. And you may have heard the term before, but there have been updates. Very clever people have scratchy head and strokey beard meetings and come up with new information. There's also a lot of common misunderstandings. So I think just starting with a little bit of what a third culture kid is, then we'll talk through some of the benefits, some of the drawbacks, but we're going to focus this time a lot around resilience, because I know resilience, it's the current theme. So, and it ties in so very well with third culture kids. So here we go. I thought we would start by, we'll use a little bit of my story because why not, as a third culture kid. So when I'm doing live presentations, I'm going to treat you the same way. And oftentimes I'll tell people, since we're talking about my childhood here, I would like you to envision me in your mind, create an image of me as a 6-year-old child. Okay. Whatever you're doing right now, drinking tea, having a walk, driving, whatever it is. If you're driving, don't close your eyes, but just envision me as a 6-year-old child. Okay. Now, when I do this live, and especially with students, I get to take a little poll, and I'm just going to ask you, and it's up to you to answer yourself. But I would love to know. Feel free to put it in the comments or something. How many of you, when I said picture me as a 6-year-old child, how many of you pictured me as a bald 6-year-old? Because a lot of people do. When I do this with students, I realized one time I was working with younger kids, and they did artwork based on my stories, and I was so excited. I thought I'm going to get my life illustrated for free. And then just page after page was a little bald kid running around. And I realized people think that I was bald as a 6-year-old. I was not. As a 6-year-old, I had hair. So very first slide, maybe the most important thing to take away from today is the fact that I had hair when I was a kid. That's the takeaway. So there I am. That's a picture of me and my little sister. As you can see, I had hair. Not just some hair. I had a lot. My mom used to stick a bowl on my head and cut around it. That was my haircut. So there we go. I have hair. You can also tell I'm a very snazzy dresser. That's not because of me. That's because of my parents. And there's my little sister. She's adorable. There's a few other things, if you were to analyze this picture, you could take away from. In the background, that is an Old English church. And that is because, despite the fact that I speak mostly with a very American accent right now, I wasn't born in the US. I was actually born in the UK and started out school in the UK. We'd already left the UK and come back by the time this picture was taken when I was about 6. But so to realign the image of me in your mind as a 6-year-old, I had hair. I was a small British child. In fact, again, my natural accent is an English accent. So fix everything in your mind. I was a small British child with lovely hair, living in a small British village called Fressingfield. And there's nothing there. If you were to put in Fressingfield in Google Maps, you'd see nothing. Just a load of fields, really, fields and pigs. So that was where I started at school as a small British child. And I want to talk to you about one of the biggest transformative memories that I have that later on would help me understand what it is to be a third culture kid. So starting out in school, we were in a tiny village, and I was just a regular British child, as much as I thought. Neither of my parents are actually British. My father is Irish and was born in Germany and grew up in France, and then joined the US military, like so many French, German, Irishmen do. My mother was actually born in America, but lived most of her life outside of it. And so I come from several generations of not really being able to answer where we're from exactly. But starting out school, in British school, it was a tiny village, so manners were of the utmost importance. And we would start each day the same way. We would get to our tiny classroom. I only had about 12 people in my class, and you'd stand silently behind your chair, and you didn't talk, and you didn't move, and you didn't breathe until a teacher came in and finally gave you permission to continue existing. And so that was our day. It was just full of politeness. That's how it worked. And everything was fine. And I was a well-dressed small British child drinking small British cups of tea in a small village in a small school. Everything was grand. My father came home one day and he mentioned those magic words that you may well have said to your children, that many children have heard. And my dad came home and he said, "Family, we're moving." And we said, "Well, that's exciting. Where are we going? Should we go to London? That'd be fun." And he said, "No, we're going to Las Vegas, Nevada, in the United States of America." And so we did. We up and moved from a very small village in England to an incredibly large city in the US. And I went from a school of maybe a total of 100 students and some sheep. That was my school in Fressingfield. We moved to Las Vegas, where my school, my primary school or elementary school, had 3,500 students, which is just an overwhelming amount for an elementary school. And I remember I got to school, and I assumed, as we all do, we project, we universalize our experience. So I assumed school would be similar to how it was in England, because why wouldn't it be? School is school. So I thought I would be getting into a classroom of maybe a dozen students, and we would all stand silent and quietly behind our chairs. That is not how school works in public schools in Las Vegas, at least when I was there. No, I entered my classroom, and it was absolute chaos. There was not 12 silent students. There were 40 students running and screaming and yelling. Something was on fire. 2 kids were taped to the ceiling. There was a roulette table and a gang fight. And I distinctly remember thinking, I will die here. This is the end. This is the end. And then a terrifying thing happened. In all this chaos, out of the corner of the room, there was this synthesized gong sound. And at the sound of the gong, everything froze. It was like a spell had been cast. And at the sound of this gong, everything stopped. Kids fell off the ceiling, fires were put out, roulette tables were hidden, guns were holstered, everything just stopped. Then at the sound of the second gong, everybody simultaneously stood up and all at the same time turned to the corner of the room, and they all put their right hand on their heart, and they began to recite what I would later learn is the American Pledge of Allegiance. And that makes perfect sense to loads of Americans. If that's what you do in American school, that's what you're used to. As a small British child, I had no idea what was going on. And I didn't want to look stupid, so I stood up because everyone else was standing, and I turned because everyone else turned, and I put hand on heart. I could see that was the thing to do. I happened to be left-handed, so I put left hand on heart, which apparently is a very disrespectful no-no. And then I could hear them saying very patriotic things, and so I thought to myself, right, what do I know that's patriotic? That's what we do, apparently. And as a small British child, the only patriotic thing that I knew was God Save the Queen. So that's what I did. I stood facing the flag of the United States with the wrong hand on my heart and proudly proclaimed, God save our gracious Queen, long live our noble Queen, send her victorious, happy and glorious, long train over us, God save the Queen. Which made perfect sense to me, but could be construed as slightly disrespectful, because there's some history between the US and the UK. Some tea was thrown in a harbour, we're all friends now. The problem is the Pledge of Allegiance doesn't go for very long, so everybody else finished, and there should just be silence at the end. And it ends on such a rousing note. It ends with liberty and justice for all, and then there should be silence. But not this day. This day, there was one small voice that continued a one-man homage to the Queen. Everybody else stopped, liberty and justice for all, and I kept going, happy and glorious, long train over us, God save the Queen. And my teacher was livid because she thought I was being intentionally disrespectful. So she called me out in front of the whole class and told me how disrespectful I was being. That was just the beginning of my troubles. The other thing was, if you remember back, in fact, here, look, I can just show you. Remember how I dressed? This may make it look like I moved to Las Vegas in the 1970s. No, I moved in the 90s. And in the 90s, neon colors had only just been discovered. So everyone dressed in neon. In the US, the 90s didn't come to the UK until about 2005. So I still dressed like the 70s. So when I was called out in front of my classroom, everybody noticed how ridiculously different I dressed and looked. And it was just the beginning of a load of difficulties. And people made fun of how I spoke. I was the only person in the entire school with a British accent. And so roving gangs of children used to come find me and ask me to repeat words that they thought were entertaining. The word water was the bane of my existence. They thought that was just the best thing, because Americans don't say water with a T sound. They say water with a D sound, and no one's going to stop them. And so I was forced to say water over and over again. I was made fun of because of my accent, because of how I dressed, and I just didn't understand anything. And I remember getting home, and my parents very legitimately cared, and they said, well, how was your first day? And I realized I must have sounded like a small crazy person because I didn't have the language or framework to explain what was going on. And so I think the best that I could come up with was I must have said, look, it's really hot. Everyone is dressed in safety colors. They don't like the Queen, but they do love water, apparently. And I'm having, okay. And I'm sure my parents thought, all right, whatever. And there was so much more than that. It was a load of cultural difficulties. And it wasn't until many years later that I actually learned the terminology for a third culture kid. And the thing was, I did learn to adapt. I learned to speak with an American accent. I learned to wear bright neon clothing. I learned to do everything I needed to do in order to fit in, because third culture kids learn to be adaptable. It is one of their greatest strengths. And it's something that occurs because of the lifestyle that they grew up in. So I did. I learned to speak American. I adapted. And then my dad came home and he said those magic words again. He said, family, we're moving. This time we were ready. We said, that's fine, Dad. Look, America. I smell like liberty. Let's go. And he said, no, actually, we're moving back to the UK. We were furious. We said, no, we can't go back to the UK. We just undid the UK. But we did go back, and I switched accents again, and I learned a whole new set of structures in a new school. But I do think, as I look back on these experiences, it would have been so incredibly helpful. Yes, I had some natural adaptation ability, partly brought out because of my changes in environment. And that's something that TCKs get. But having the language and the framework to be able to understand my experience, to know there was a name for what I was, would have been so helpful. And I think it's helpful because one of the things that I struggled with was not being able to explain myself completely. I could sound very, very British, and I have a UK passport, and so I consider myself quite British, but I didn't live there for very long. And so later on in life, if people asked what I was, I might say, well, I'm British. But if I was around British people, it would become apparent pretty quickly that I actually didn't know a load of things that people who live in Britain would know. And so I started describing myself as, well, I'm not quite British. And the same thing with America. I can sound very American, but I didn't actually live in the US until really till I was an adult. And even then, only temporarily. And so I would say, well, I'm sort of American. And the thing for third culture kids is the language is important, because without a way to describe your experience, and that's what the TCK imagery is for, we can end up describing ourselves as not quite a whole bunch of other things. So I want to go over very quickly some good imagery to help process the TCK experience. And at this point, and when I do student presentations, I would love to be able to stand in front of students and say, dear students, the symbol for who you are as third culture kids is a phoenix rising from the ashes. But it's not near that exciting. But it's an accurate image. I think the image of a hallway is probably some of the best imagery to help understand what a TCK is, and therefore what the benefits and the drawbacks are. And here's why I say it's a hallway. Because if you were to picture your cultural identity as a house, inside of that house, you can have loads of different rooms that represent the different cultures that make you who you are. So if we took me as a very, very simple example, in my cultural house, I definitely have a room that's British. It's got a portrait of the king now in it, and tea is served promptly at 3:30, and it's very polite. There's also an American room in my house. My parents are American. I have an American passport as well. So there's an American room in my house. It's got a Starbucks. It's open 24 hours. It smells like liberty. But there's also a military room. I grew up as a military brat. And culture is more than just nationality. So for me, there's a British room, American room, and a military room. And the military room is full of acronyms. So many acronyms that mean nothing to anyone else. And an F-16 fighter jet, because why not? And even if we stop right there, what it is to be a TCK is not that you just combine all of those rooms to make your identity. Actually, it's very different than that. What it means to be a TCK is that actually you have to keep these rooms separate in order for your life to work. And so you end up spending quite a bit of time in this hallway that connects those various rooms, those various cultures. So third culture kids are not just a conglomerate of all the cultures they've experienced. There's so much more than that. I'll give you an example that makes it easy to understand. I have a very good friends who they're German, and they live in Japan, and they send their son to an international school. So it's just a very easy example to follow, because if we look at their son, when he wakes up in the morning at home, even though he's in Tokyo, he's with his German family. So they speak German to each other. They say Guten Morgen, they eat Brötchen for breakfast, and everything is wunderbar. But then he takes the metro to get to school. So he has to step out of the German room and into the Japanese room. And it's not just the language that changes, it's loads of things. It's what's considered polite, it's expectations, it's personal space. Germans have about an elbow of personal space that they're comfortable with. On the Tokyo metro, you get no personal space. And so that all changes. Then, after he's read the metro, he gets to the international school that he attends, which is taught in English. So it's yet another language, but again, so much more than that. It's also its own set of expectations and traditions. And so for his life to work, he has to move between these three distinct rooms multiple times during each day. All of these cultures are part of his identity. And what we say about third culture kids is they end up having influences from all of the cultures that they've experienced, but they don't have full ownership in any. And they usually find they have most in common with people of a similar experience. They're people of the hallway. So even if two third culture kids don't share the same rooms, they probably will get along much better with each other because they know what it's like to be in between. And I think it's important to point out that the two main ingredients that make a third culture kid are multiple cultural influences and a degree of transience. And because of those two main influences, there's a misconception sometimes that to be a TCK, you have to move around all the time. There's a lot of TCKs who never move, who stay in one place, because just by attending an international school, even if a student was at an international school and never left, they would still be getting multiple cultural influences, because an international school is full of cultures, and it's likely that perhaps the home culture and the school culture are different, or the local culture that the school is situated in is different. So multiple cultural influences. And even if they're not moving, international schools are far more transient. Even with a low turnover rate of, say, 30%, that still means that every few years, a third of your social structure changes. That's a lot of transience while you're a student. So, third culture kids don't necessarily fly around a jet set all the time. Some third culture kids stay put, but they still have multiple cultural influences and a degree of transience. So, that is a lot of information, but I think it's such an important core to start with because understanding who a TCK is, that they're the people of the hallway and they have to navigate different rooms that make them who they are, that they're a combination of being in transience and having multiple cultural influences. This combination of things we've found, and they've been studied for a good 60, 70 years now, comes with a great set of challenges and a great set of strengths. And the reason I say even great challenges is I'll let you in on something that I'll say again at the end of the presentation. There's a lot we know about third culture kids that are becoming much more relevant on a wider scale. The strengths third culture kids have, everybody's going to need. The challenges third culture kids face, everybody will soon be facing. Now, there's so much information that we could go into in all of this, but I want to make sure and respect everybody's time. Otherwise, we're going to have to hunker down. We'll be here for hours, but I promise I'll behave myself. So I want to zero in on just a few things that I think are very relevant as far as benefits and drawbacks, with a special regard to resilience. And resilience is such an important thing, and it's tied in so closely with the TCK experience. There are loads of other facets that we could get into, everything from transition and change management to conflict resolution and dealing with grief. All of those are aspects of the TCK experience, but a lot of them in some ways tie into this core idea of being able to be resilient. And that's something that I think has become more difficult, not just in third culture kids, but really in the wider population as well. I came across this piece of information not too long ago, and it's that 1 in 4 college students is diagnosed with or treated for a mental health condition each year, with 8 in 10 students saying they felt overwhelmed, and nearly half, 45%, saying that things felt hopeless. And that ties in really, really well, in fact, in a probably very sobering way, with our abilities when it comes to resilience. And the reality is, resilience has been challenged in many ways. And this applies, I think, to third culture kids because they already need a higher degree of resilience because they're dealing with transience and because issues of identity can be harder for them. So by focusing on resilience, we're actually helping to overcome a lot of the challenges and make the most out of many of the benefits that come with it. So let's unpack that just a little bit more. I think we have to start with sort of a definition of resilience. Resilience is one of those words that we hear, and we go, yes, 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 that's good. But what does it really mean? And there's loads of marvelously clever people who've come up with definitions. The simplest one I can think of is just this image. I think resilience is just like it's a 3-year-old when they fall off their bike because they have to get back up. And really, that's kind of all resilience is. Resilience is our ability to get back up when we stumble or are pushed down or fall down for whatever reason. Resilience is us getting back up. So for third culture kids, they're demonstrating resilience when they have to learn a new set of rules for each of the rooms that makes up who they are. They're demonstrating resilience when the transience they experience means they have to make new friends or deal with losses. So resilience is core to a lot of what makes a third culture kid who they are. So learning how that we can improve it and cultivate it is of incredible benefit. Now, we're in 2024 now, but the pandemic still looms large. And so I still think we have to bring it up. And I think we have to bring it up because the pandemic actually left a lot of effects for all of us, really, but some that we're still dealing with in students. And I'll cover very quickly why I say that. And I say that because I'm going to draw on research done by marvelously clever people. Dr. who wrote a book. Oh, no, I remember his name. Kuhneman, there we go. Wrote a book called Thinking, Fast and Slow. And in it, he talks about 2 styles that our brain uses for thinking. We have fast thinking, which is pattern recognition, and that's tied to our limbic system because there's loads of things that we streamline and do for efficiency's sake. Breathing, walking, all sorts of stuff you just do and know how to do it. And then there's slow thinking, critical analysis. That's where we actually stop and have creative synthesis. It takes more energy. So because creative thinking takes more energy, our body is always trying to make things efficient. We streamline loads of stuff. Chairs, I think, are a great example. We have streamlined chairs in that you probably look at a chair and recognize a chair pretty quickly. Don't even think about it. It's in your limbic system. It's pattern recognition, and we know that it's meant for sitting on. Very few people take the time to do a structural integrity check on every chair before they sit, because that would take so much time. And we have a load of experience that says, looks like a chair. They usually hold me. I'm sure it'll be fine. That's pattern recognition. Now, how this relates to the pandemic and what it's done and why we need to pay attention when it comes to resilience is the pandemic made a lot of things that used to be pattern recognition move into critical analysis. Let's take doors for an example. Doors used to be easy pattern recognition. If you saw a door, if you had to count how many doors you encounter in a day, you probably couldn't answer because it's pattern recognition. But then the pandemic made doors critical analysis. You couldn't take them for granted. Suddenly doors became transition places. Is this door somewhere I put a mask on or take a mask off? Doors were also covered in information: who can enter at what times, where the nearest hand cleaning or hand sanitizer was. So doors had to move from pattern recognition into critical analysis. And when we move things into critical analysis, it requires more energy. And the thing is, even though we're stacking on the months, almost even years now at this point since the pandemic, we're still suffering from the fact that a lot of things that we could think quickly about, pattern recognition, got shifted over into critical analysis. Resilience is harder when we have less energy. And so part of the reason I think that after the pandemic, we saw struggles with resilience among third culture kids and loads of other people was we're expending more energy. We're still having to do critical analysis for things that we never used to before. Another thing that has threatened resilience, and this is why I think it's so important to focus on, is actually just technology. Now, I love technology. I'm not against it. I think technology is fantastic. I mean, technology lets us do this presentation even though we're thousands of miles apart. I'm all for it. But we do need to bear in mind that technology takes things away as well as giving them to us. So let's take screens. Screens give us a ton of great things. They're incredibly useful. I'm not anti-screen, but it's worth bearing in mind that they actually have made a dent in our resilience abilities. And part of the reason for that is that screens are phenomenal numbing devices. And what I mean by that is that if I have to wait in line for anything, I'm gonna spend time on a screen. I mean, my phone's right here. If I got bored waiting in line, I would play on my phone. No one's bored anymore, and that's something adults do. It's something that kids do as well. Kids have earlier and earlier access to screens, and they're going to grow up in a world that uses them. So that's important. But because screens numb, it means that sometimes it takes away the opportunities we have to build core resilience. So using a screen to numb boredom makes a ton of sense. But actually, boredom teaches creativity. And so because the students in school now have had access to screens pretty much their whole lives, they haven't really experienced the same kind of boredom. They haven't been able to develop the creativity that comes along with that. Screens can also numb loneliness. If you're feeling lonely, you can hop on a screen and just scroll through other people's lives. Screens don't solve boredom. They don't solve loneliness, but they numb it. And if loneliness is actually, it's a pain, but it teaches us social skills that are really important. It teaches us interdependence. Awkwardness can also be numbed with a screen. If you went to a social occasion and a group of people were all speaking and you weren't in that group, I guarantee that your hand, without you even knowing it was doing it, would pull out your phone to protect you, because it protects you from awkwardness. Because then all those other people who you're not talking with would look over at you, and instead of seeing a lonely person, they would say, oh, they're fine. They must be talking with their friends on their phone. So screens numb boredom, loneliness, and awkwardness. But those are all actually really important pains that we used to deal with when we were very young that develop creativity and interdependence and help us polish our social skills. And because those have been numbed, some of those baseline resiliences haven't been developed. So then something like the pandemic comes along and throws this ginormous weight at everybody. And in some ways, screens removed the very small training weights out of the gym of life. And for third culture kids, there's a lot of resilience that they build up because of that combination of multiple cultural influences and transience. But even third culture kids, I think, have lost some degree of resilience because screens can numb these very important things. So What do we do about it? And what do we do in particular with third culture kids? What do we do with them to help them bring out the strengths they have and help them overcome the challenges they face? And I believe that resilience is at the core of a lot of those. I think one of the most important things we can do is this very simple phrase is we can learn to process intellectually what we do intuitively. And this is of incredible importance for third culture kids because we do a lot of life through intuition. And intuition is great. It's fast. It's that pattern recognition, that limbic system. And yet, sometimes it's really important if we can give language to something and then bring it out. Because once an internal feeling or something like our intuition has been brought outside and given language, it can be shared, it can be refined, it can be taught. And for third culture kids, this is incredibly important because a lot of the normal definitions that we use for identity don't necessarily work for them. One of the easiest questions to ask someone if you want to get to know them is, "Oh, where are you from?" And for most of the world, that's a pretty easy question. You answer it with a statement. But third culture kids usually answer that with a story because where are you from for a third culture kid? I mean, do you mean where was I born? Where have I lived the longest? Where are my parents from? Where do I live now? All of those things might be different answers for a third culture kid. So identity is far more complicated, which means one of the best things we can do for third culture kids is help them process intellectually what they do intuitively. And some of that is giving them the language and the framework to understand their experience, to know what it is to have this combination of transience and multiple cultural influences, to give them the imagery of the hallway so that they have the language to process intellectually the identity experience they're going through. There's a great story about the color blue that I want to share with you briefly, just to underline why they think that language is so important. Blue, apparently, is the color that gets named last in almost every language in ancient Chinese, ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, even in Latin. Blue is the last color named, which you may never have thought of the order of colors being created, but it's true. We usually have words for light and dark first, and then red, because danger and blood, and then green, because growing. But blue always gets named last because it's usually a background color. It's usually sky or water. Anyway, they did this fantastic study with a tribe in Namibia whose language hadn't yet developed the word blue. And they would show them a page full of green squares with one blue square and ask them to identify which one was different. And for most of them, it took them way longer than you would think. In fact, some of them said, "I'm not even sure if there is a difference." Whereas I would look at it and immediately be able to point out, well, there's one blue square amongst all these green squares. And when they gave them the same test in all green squares, but one at a slightly different hue, they could point that one out immediately. I saw this test and I could not point it out. They have lots of words for green, and so they could find the different green one, but they did not yet have a word for blue, so they struggled to be able to name blue. Now, physically, they can see blue. It wasn't anything physically different. The reality that linguists learn is that when we don't have a word for something, we tend not to focus on it, and we might even have trouble recognizing it. For third culture kids, I think that one of the greatest things we can do to help them make the most of the strengths they have and help them to face the challenges that they're going through is to give them language, is to name the colors of their lives. And resilience, I think, is one of the great ways to do that. It's also a great tie between them and the rest of the world. So what I want to do is talk just a bit about resilience because I think it brings together many of the challenges and many of the strengths that third culture kids face. And just like we've done before, I think we have to start with a little bit of an example of why I think we have to pull resilience apart. So we talked about the definition. It's being able to get back up after you stumble. But what do we do with that? Well, I read an article about a father who took his son to a music festival. And the father said, my son really wanted to go. His favorite bands were playing, so we went. This music festival was in England, and it just rained the whole time. And the father said, this was one of the most miserable experiences I've ever had. The father said, I was in the army, and we never went through anything this bad. We went to a music festival. We were amongst 40,000 people in a sopping wet tent, sleeping in a puddle, and then using one of 12 porta potties for 40,000 people. He said it was miserable. He said, but my son woke up every morning with the biggest smile on his face. He was willing to put up with all this hardship in order to see his favorite bands. And the father said, my son's pretty resilient. And he was very proud. And apparently, a couple of weeks later, his son got a lower grade on an exam than he thought he was going to, and it devastated him. He basically stopped talking and didn't want to come out of his room for 2 weeks. And the father said, maybe my son's not that resilient. And this is the complexity with resilience, is it's a complicated word. So thankfully, some very clever people have broken down resilience into useful parts that I want to use, especially with third culture kids. And this is put together. You can email me if you would like more details on this. Dr. Wong, there we go. I remembered another name. He wrote a paper on the taxonomy of resilience, and he breaks it down into some major components. And we're going to go over 5 of them. I'll give you the definitions and why they apply to third culture kids and beyond. So first up, we have cognitive resilience. And cognitive resilience is our ability to interpret and negotiate events. It basically means our ability to plan ahead. So some people have great cognitive resilience. On the path of life, it would be looking a bit ahead and going, oh, it gets rocky up there, so I'm going to slow down so that maybe I don't stumble. Some people have great cognitive resilience. They plan ahead and go, oh, I've got a test on Friday. I better start studying Monday. So obviously, all students have natural cognitive resilience, except that they don't. But this is a part of resilience, planning ahead. Another type of resilience is our behavioral resilience. Those are the habits that we employ to overcome difficulty. So again, on the path of life, behavioral resilience would be looking ahead, and perhaps you did stumble a little bit, and you say, you know what? Before I get back up and keep running, I'm going to put a plaster or a Band-Aid, depending on where you're from, over my knee, then I'll keep going. So behavior resilience is our coping mechanisms. It's saying, I'm really stressed. I know that means I need to go for a run so that I don't yell at someone. Or it means I need to draw a long bath because I need to calm down. Or I need to do breathing exercises. Behavioral resilience is our ability to have coping mechanisms. Moving on, we've got motivational resilience. Motivational resilience is our drive and our purpose. It's what compels us to keep going. Motivational resilience is why we get back up when we stumble. A really good, easy check into sort of your own mental health is to be able to say that you can tell what your motivation is short, medium, and long term. So short term, what are you looking forward to in the next day or so? Medium, what are you looking forward to, say, in the next year? And long term, what are you looking forward to further down the road? We should be able to answer each one of those if we're in a positive mental state. So motivational resilience, why we get back up. Then next, we've got relational resilience. Relational resilience is our support network, and it's tied closely with our abilities and empathy. And that is a whole other presentation talking about how important empathy is to the third culture kid experience. But for now, it ties in so well with relational resilience. Our ability to ask for help when we need it and to recognize when other people need help. And then finally, we've got emotional resilience. That's our ability to tolerate and even learn from negative feelings and events. And the reality is this one is under incredible threat because marketing tells us that we should be happy all the time, and that if we're not happy all the time, something's horribly wrong. In reality, humans are meant for a wide range of emotions in balance. We can't actually be happy all the time. If you had a constant drip of serotonin, oxytocin, or dopamine, the happy chemicals in your brain, if they were constantly applied, you physiologically would burn out your happy circuits. We're not designed to be happy all the time. We can strive for it and we should achieve it a fair amount of the time, but we're also going to be sad and hungry and tired and all kinds of things. And our emotional resilience is our ability to tolerate those negative feelings sometimes. So, an interesting exercise that you can do for yourself and even for your children is to rate yourself on each of these. If you were to give yourself a 1 to 5 rating in each of these 5 areas, how would you rate yourself? It's really interesting because it's a little bit too much to just say that, we're resilient or we're not resilient. Actually, it's far more complicated than that. There are all these different types of resilience. And if we look at the third culture kid experience, all of these tie into that. Because once again, remember, the strengths of a third culture kid really are a lot about adaptability. They have to move in and out of these different rooms that make them who they are. And in order to do that, you have to employ each of these things. It requires a little planning ahead to realize that the way you interact at school might be different than the customs and norms in the country you're living in, might be different than the customs and norms at home. You have to plan for that. Behavior resilience. Third culture kids have to develop coping mechanisms. How are they going to cope with saying goodbye to friends? How are they going to cope with having to be the new kid or make new friends? Motivational resilience in the third culture experience is really important. What are they looking forward to? What are they going to bring to a world that is moving closer and closer to their experience? Relational resilience, being able to relate to TCKs and non-TCKs. How are third culture kids who've grown up in transient going to relate to someone who maybe has only lived in one culture? How are they going to ask for help when they need it, even amidst transition? And emotional resilience. Grief and loss are part of everybody's life. But in reality, third culture kids tend to face more grief and more loss more frequently because of transition. So they have all the more reason to need to develop emotional resilience. These strengths and these challenges are core to the concept, and they're really, really important to be able to look into. And I think that we need to look into it because in reality, one of the great things about being human is that we actually do best when we have just the right amount of challenge. We know very well from loads and loads of studies that too much adversity can be a very dangerous thing. Too much adversity, too much difficulty, and we don't thrive. But what we don't realize sometimes is it's a bell curve. And on the flip side, the opposite is also true. Too little resilience or too little challenge actually can be just as damaging. We do best with just the right amount of challenge because we get to exercise that resilience. So third culture kids, actually because of their lifestyle, the fact that they need all these resiliences because their life throws at them the need to adapt, actually stand a really good chance of being able to make the most of this. So building resilience, because we're drawing to a close already, building resilience in a practical way is very much like building muscles. The only way to build resilience is basically to face measurably and manageably increasing difficulties and then learn from it. When we build muscle, that's pretty much the way that works. If you lift a weight that's a little heavier than you're comfortable with, you actually damage muscle fibers. And after they're damaged, they have to heal and they create scar tissue, which is actually more muscle. So your muscle gets bigger. And then you lift something a little heavier again, and it builds more muscle by creating more scar tissue. Resilience works the same way. The only way to build resilience is to deal with manageably increasing difficulties. And manageable is very, very important here. But in order to manage it, we have to be able to name it. So for third culture kids, again, language is so important. Being able to spell out these different types of resilience, being able to spell out what the third culture kid experience is. I think that in closing, I want to leave with some ideas on how we can help build resilience, because again, there's so much to all of this, to all of the different strengths, all of the different challenges for the third culture kid experience. But I think all of those rest on this idea of being able to provide the language and framework in order to process their experiences so that they can think about them intellectually as opposed to just intuitively. And these core resiliences underpin all of those strengths and challenges. So how do we help increase that? Well, I have one final story for you that I think ties that together. And it's the story of a time traveler. If I had a time traveling device and I went back to medieval times and I got out of my time machine in, let's say, medieval England, and I got out in medieval England and I said, hello, people of medieval England, I'm going to open a gym. It would not go well. Even if I tried to sell it and said, I know you don't know what a gym is, but hear me out. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to have a gym and I'm going to have treadmills where you can run and go nowhere. And I don't think they would go for that. I think medieval peasants would probably say, listen, if I run, I better need to get somewhere because I barely eat enough to stay alive. I'm not going to run for no reason. And I would say, okay, hear me out. It gets better. I'm going to have weights, heavy objects, and you can pick them up and put them right back down. Yeah. And I'm sure they would look at me and say, no, you're out of your mind. I'm only going to pick something heavy up if I have to move it. Again, I barely eat enough to stay alive. And then I would say, and best part, you're going to pay me to run and go nowhere and lift heavy things and put them back down. And at that point, they'd probably come storming after me with pitchforks. Because a gym back then would have been ridiculous because they did barely eat enough to stay alive and had physical exertion. Now, between us and them is the Industrial Revolution. And so we have separated physical exertion, but we still need it to be healthy. So we've added it back in intentionally. A gym is the ultimate inefficiency. If you think about it, we pay money to do something incredibly inefficient. We pay money to run and go nowhere. We pay money to pick up weights and then put them back down because we've had to add back in intentionally things that we evolved past technologically. And here's where I think we can actually be of great use to third culture kids, is we can help them with some intentional inefficiencies. If you look back at those different types of resilience, what are ways that we can incentivize those? I think, for example, one thing we can do for third culture kids is start by providing them the language and framework, giving them the imagery of the hallway so that it can explain their identity, to be able to break down resilience and be able to describe where they're challenged and where they have strengths, how all of those different types of resilience tie into having multiple cultural influences in transition. And we need to be able to give them room in order to work these things out. When I was learning to tie my shoes, my mother knew very well that I would need extra time. So if we had to be out of the house at 8, she would start getting me ready at 7:45 because I would take that long to tie my shoes. My poor dad didn't get the memo. So at 8 o'clock, he'd be like, all right, let's go. And as I struggled to tie my shoes, not fast enough, he would just tie them for me. The same is true in building resilience. We have to add some extra room in order for third culture kids to be able to practice these things relationally, when it comes to planning ahead, dealing with negative emotions. I think we can also incentivize things well. I drove in Los Angeles, and they have HOV lanes, they have carpool lanes, and you get to drive in the carpool lane if you have multiple people in the car. So you get to go faster with multiple people. Without knowing it, they're actually incentivizing community, because they're saying, if you want to go faster and you're willing to share a small car with someone you'll probably have to talk to, that's incentive. If you want the privilege of sitting alone, you don't get to go as fast. What are things that we can incentivize, that we could create intentional inefficiencies to highlight the skills third culture kids already have and the areas they need to grow? How could we incentivize that? We can incentivize planning ahead, having coping mechanisms, having a support system, tolerating negative situations. One example of an intentional inefficiency, and I have to give, this is my last example, and I have to give a little disclaimer here that this was just a test, and I'm certainly not saying everyone should do it. One teacher decided that the intentional inefficiency he would add was they had a system at the school where they would put all the assignments online. For a month, he didn't do that. He would only give assignments verbally in class. And he said it was actually a great example of an intentional inefficiency. He got way more interaction with his students because they had to talk. They couldn't rely on the software. He said the students had to talk to each other more, because if a student was missing, they had to talk to other students. Not at all saying that we should take out technology, but it's a fun example of how sometimes we can slow technology down in order to build some intentional inefficiency. I want to close today with the incredible power of motivational resilience being infectious. And this is very, very true. We tend to be more resilient when we're around other people who are resilient. And so by building this up in our students, I think we're going to help them build it up in each other by modeling resilience ourselves, even explaining it, being able to process intellectually what we do intuitively, understanding that we're helping by planning ahead, we're helping by asking for help when we need it, we're doing these things for healthy reasons. That actually is very, very infectious in a good way. And I think this enables third culture kids to be phenomenal bridge builders in a world that, as I said, is moving closer and closer to their experience. So with that in mind, I really do think third culture kids are well placed to be beacons of hope, because the resiliences they get to practice, everybody will soon need. The challenges they face, the whole world is becoming more transient. The whole world has to deal with multiple cultures. They've already got a leg up on it. They're a preview of coming attractions. And because of that, I want to leave you with one last quote. I close most of my presentations with it because it's my favorite quote, and I believe it applies to your students. I believe it applies to third culture kids. I believe it applies even to you as parents. And the quote is simply this: I believe that your gift to the world around you and your students' gift to the world around them is hope. And it's not a blind hope that just pretends everything is fine when clearly it's not. But it's the kind of hope that comes from staring pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuses to believe that's all there is. To me, that is one of the most amazing definitions of resilience: the ability to stare pain and suffering right in the eyes and refuse to believe that's all there is. And if we're working hard at it, that is what we're empowering third culture kids to be. Now, as I said, there is so much more to this. There are so many more different avenues we can look at. But I think this was a great place to at least get some core things unpacked as far as processing intellectually what third culture kids do intuitively, the importance of language and framework for identity, the importance of mixing that transience and multiple cultural influences into the different types of resilience that are needed in their lifestyle. So I'm going to leave, I'll put my information up there. If you have questions or would like a PDF version of this, would like to know anything more about the research, please do feel free to get in touch. And then I think we even have some time for questions now because I behaved and stayed relatively within the time limits, which is a huge accomplishment for me. So thank you so much for joining me. And I do hope we get to chat a little bit.
Wow. Thank you so much, Chris. Like I've been looking forward to this talk. I've already said that. But I didn't realize how funny you were. So apologies for that. I didn't expect to be entertained as well. I can't say TCK, just doesn't, third culture kids. As a mum of two third culture kids, having been here for 12 years, my son was born here, I am so relieved hearing some of what you've just said, because I know a lot of our parents out there feel a sense of, sometimes a little bit of confusion or guilt, or where should we be? Where should we be raising our kids? Is this the right? And actually listening to you today and hearing some of the things you've talked about has given me a lot of hope and a lot of confidence. And we've had some lovely comments. I just want to say thank you to Zaina, to Monique, who's emailed me, to Mariam, and to Gerardo as well, for making some lovely comments, lovely thoughts on that as well. We have got questions. We've literally got a few minutes. I'm already thinking ahead now. How do I get you into school? We need you to speak to our children. What can we put on the curriculum about this? Really,
I love it.
And I think some of the things as well, just takeaways from this about the hallway. It's such a great way of thinking about it. These rooms that our children have, that they live in, the culture, the differences, but also where they find that common ground. I teach A-level age children as well, and they're back for the holidays. And I have been so delighted this week by so many of them coming back into school to see us, because they spend that last part. They can't wait to get away. They can't wait to get away. They're done with Abu Dhabi and they go off to the universities all over the world. And yet the first chance they have, they come back, because this is it's almost a bit Hogwarty, this is a place where they
speaks volumes. That's so good.
And honestly, like last night I was chatting to someone at netball, one of my ex-students who's gone off to the US, and she has siblings, and all of them have a different accent because of when they came here and the influences. And I found that fascinating, and listening to your accent and how you switch, it's and also knowing, when my daughter was FS, the water, yogurt, castle.
Yep. It's so true.
As a family, it's like, who are you speaking like, and the influences they have. But we have a couple of questions, so I'm just gonna ask a couple if we can. One from me actually is, do you think that access to social media platforms, has that helped our children? Is that helping our third culture kids to stay connected? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Like, what's the research showing?
Oh, goodness. It's a little bit of both, to be perfectly honest. I think for third culture kids, they have more reason to need to stay in touch across geographic space. And so social media and, online platforms, they're so helpful with that. And it also puts them on equal footing because everybody has taken to social media. So it's something that actually is a great equalizer, that third culture kids need to stay in touch over long distances. Everybody else loves social media anyway. So in some ways, it's a great equalizer. And I think there's a lot of good that has come about it. But like so much in technology, there's some cost to it as well. It's easy. One of the, again, there's so many different ways we could take so many points here, but one difficulty some third culture kids struggle with is actually having too many relationships. I had a student when I was in Brussels who asked me about this, and they said, look, I moved here from Australia and I spend so much time online with my friends in Australia because I know I need long-term friendships. I said, yes, very healthy, good. And they said, but I need to make friends here too, and how do I find time for that? And then before I could even think of something, he said, and I'm only here a year. I'm going to go off to university in the US, and I'll need to make friends there and keep in touch with friends in Brussels and keep in touch with friends from Australia. And my family is in Hong Kong. There's only 24 hours in a day. How do I balance all that? And I said, I have no idea, because it can actually be overwhelming. And it's a very odd thing that, not many people are going to get a lot of sympathy saying, well, I just know so many people. But for third culture kids, they have more access to more people. So I think it's good and bad. It forces them to have to balance out the way they invest their time. And so in some ways, social media can be the agony of choice. But on a positive note, it at least allows them to stay connected far better than we ever have before. So there's a little bit of both to it. But man, it's such an interesting, there's so much just even in that thought.
There is. And I think just as adults as well, moving out, coming here, we feel that too. I only came for a year and I wasn't going to make any friends because what was the point? And then we stayed. And it's like, you've got to put that time and energy then, but you feel that sense of guilt again, leaving the people behind. And I'm sure it is exactly the same for our children.
Absolutely.
We have so many questions. Honestly, we could do another talk because we have so many. One question is about language. Our children are exposed to multiple languages. Does it cause delays in language speech recognition in languages, or is it a positive thing?
Oh, the research is a little bit divided, but in general, most of the research shows that it's a positive thing. It's phenomenal for neuroplasticity and all sorts of things to, especially if you pick up languages during your developmental years. In fact, there are fascinating studies that show the effects on our brain are overwhelmingly positive. There might be some slowdowns, but overall, we expand the frameworks that we use to think about things. There are access to different emotions. They're fascinating studies about how people will feel different things in different language. They took some bilingual speakers and realized by dividing up and looking at how they reacted to things, most of them, this was Spanish and English speakers, that they tended to get more passionately angry in Spanish as opposed to how they would say in English. And so they looked at that in different circumstances and they said, it's basically that with two languages, you have access to a whole nother set of colors. You can paint so much more vividly and you can think so much more vividly. So in general, most of the research definitely says it's a positive thing, especially during developmental years. Like everything else, not without some struggles, but the benefits seem to be overwhelming.
Okay,
good question. Ooh.
Yeah, I've never really thought about that before. What is, and there's a couple of questions kind of similar with this, what is the most useful skill, as an expert in this, that you think, or character trait, or, whatever we call it, that you think being a third culture kid really, gives to our children?
Oh, I really would. I mean, it sounds a little too obvious, but genuinely the adaptability. And that's one of those words, again, we could do a whole talk just on this. It's one of those words that it's easy to throw around, but to show you why I think that's so powerful is that what TCKs take for granted is they are constantly adapting. And that adaptation draws in empathy, it draws in observation skills, it draws in critical analysis, all sorts of things. Because when you are dealing with multiple cultures, you're not just having to think about different languages, you're having to look at different hierarchies, different what's considered polite, and the ability to adapt requires you to empathize. There are some things, no matter how hard we try, we could never fully dialogue about everything you'd need to fit into X culture. Some of it you just have to witness for yourself and react to. You have to go, oh, okay, this is not the place to speak loudly, or, oh, this is the place where it's polite to. Not all of that can be expressed, so they have to empathize. And adaptability, that is going to put them so far ahead. As a super quick example, and I know we're running out of time, but I get so excited. We look at communication styles. People long distance wrote letters. That was the main form of communication for centuries. Someone 50 years ago and 300 years ago, basically you kept in touch writing letters. In my lifetime, it switched to the advent of email. That was amazing. That lasted for decades. Now we've come back around to mostly quick communication if we want to keep in touch. So texting, that lasted for maybe years. And now there's Instagram and BeReal and Snapchat. And there's a new social media platform born today that will only last a week and everyone will be on it. But what that means is transition is happening so much faster. Communication styles went from being centuries to decades to years to maybe months or days. And
Yeah.
that means we have to adapt so much faster. So for third culture kids, the adaptation that they have to do moving in and out of those rooms is a core set of skills that they're going to need in a world that changes faster and faster and faster. Like I said, centuries became decades, became years, became months as far as the rate of change. And they are better prepared for it because their lifestyle requires constant adaptation. I think it's going to serve them well. There are loads of other ones, but if I had to pick one, that would be the number one.
I'm sure. And like I say, we could talk for ages about this. Shameless plug, your book.
Oh, right.
Does this delve
I do
more
have a
into
book.
it? Is it useful for parents? You know, is it useful for our parents to read?
Well, I mean, I think so, but no, I genuinely did. I wrote it because this is just it. There's never enough time to cover everything, and I wanted something that could be read at a student level as well. So it is. It's written, and it's written with a bunch of funny stories because really, you remember things better if you laugh. So it is. It's written basically to to draw out the strengths and challenges of being a TCK, give some language and framework through funny stories that could be read either by a parent or a student, because there's way too much information, and more keeps coming out, but and it's even available as an audiobook, so if you don't feel like reading it, I will just read it to you, and it's available,
In
you
which
know, on my
accent do
website.
you read it?
Several, actually, several. The publisher and I had a big chat about that, and they said, just use them all, and I said, okay.
And you've got a podcast, so I'm going to be
I do
tuning into
indeed,
that.
yeah, so feel free to tune into that. We do. We talk about issues relevant to expats.
Just one observation, just as we end this, while you were talking, and especially, talking about your friend's child in Tokyo, I was just thinking about how exhausting this must be for our children, like having to go through so many different micro adaptations every day, dealing with the change, dealing with that from this to this. It is no wonder our children are tired, and we throw them into CCAs so they make more friends, and that's great. But I'm coming away from this as a mom thinking, goodness, actually, I'm gonna let my teenager sleep in a little bit more this weekend.
We do. We all need a little room for rest. It's so true. Oh, it's so
but
true.
For us as parents as well, and as teachers, but
yeah,
just for our kids, especially those starting new as well. And I know there's key times, like we've got new students who've just arrived into year 8, into year 9. We know that's a tougher transition into being a teenager in a new country. And we're very mindful of that. Whereas I feel for the little ones, it can be a bit easier, I think, although I don't know about that. Am I right?
In some ways. Oh, in some ways, definitely, because it's less complicated social structures, and so it is a little bit easier. But it makes me think, if there was one last piece of information I could throw out, it's that I think it's so easy, and you said it so well. It's very easy to feel guilty as parents and think, oh my goodness, like what an exhausting and challenging way to raise a child. What have I done? But here's the truth of the matter, and this isn't. This really is just a fact if you think about it, is that nobody gets to choose their upbringing. Nobody. And so third culture kids, they didn't ask to be third culture kids, but non-third culture kids didn't ask to be non-third culture kids. Nobody gets a choice in how they're brought up, and we all still turn out. And it doesn't always line up. I mean, I have friends who are so jealous of the way I grew up. They think, look, I grew up in a small town, and my parents, if they had just let me live internationally, I would be amazing. But they didn't get a choice. And there's some third culture kids that, maybe they would do so much better, as just planted in one place. But there's no way to know, and nobody gets to pick. And everybody gets a set of strengths and challenges. If you grow up in a big city, strengths and challenges. If you grow up in a small village, strengths and challenges. So TCK is just one of so many different ways to grow up. And it's not better or worse. It's just different. It's just its own set of strengths and challenges. I would argue, biased, that I think it's a little better because, again, the world moves closer to this experience. Their preview of coming attractions. I think that's a bigger advantage. But in general, everybody grows up with their own culture and nobody got to pick. And so I don't think there's no reason to feel guilty, because you as a parent didn't get to pick how you grew up and your kids don't. And that's just the way life is. We make the best of it. We take the strengths we're given and capitalize on them. We take the challenges we face and we hope to learn from them. That's true for everybody, TCK and non-TCK alike.
Absolutely. And that is a great way to end. And, you know, we're grateful for people like you who spend the time, who, you know, do the research, who do the talks, who help us to you know, to do better at this, to do the best we can as parents. We try to be at Cranley Abu Dhabi, you know, part of the village, part of the help and support that our parents need, to, you know, to raise our children the best we can. So thank you to everyone listening out there. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the comments. You know, we'll be back in, you know, next term with another one of these talks. I hope it is as good as this. I'm hoping already we can get you back in. But thank you so much, honestly, Chris. It's been a really, really good talk. I know we've had a lot of food for thought, as a parent and as a teacher. So thank you so much to everyone out there, to our CCC. Thank you for funding this, and thank you for all the hard work that you do. And yeah, stay safe, keep well, and we'll be back with you soon. So thank you all. And I'm going to end that there because we are a little bit over, but never mind. I'm sure nobody minds. Thank you so much, Chris. We'll see you soon. Bye. Bye.